Short MC. It happened in the late 60s, when my father was in a boarding school. The conditions were rather strict. He would only go out once a week, between noon and 6 p.m. on Sundays. Needless to say, he didn't really like the school. So he was one of the first trying to have fun. Sleeping in was also a rare occurrence, and God knows why it was allowed the Saturday of the compliance. They could stay in beds for how long they wanted the morning, at the condition the pupils would take their breakfast before 8:30. This is where the MC starts. Pissed off because the sleep-in was effectively denied, my dad and his roommates noticed they could take their breakfast. But it was nowhere mentioned they had to eat it at the cafeteria. Cue to the morning and they all get to the cafeteria with suitcases, at 7:30. Upon arriving they open them, and start pouring plates, fruits, forks, spoons, drinks, etc. in the suitcases. Then they come back to their room and start eating. Of course they were not unnoticed, and other pupils start imitating them. Soon the whole school has raided the cafeteria and there is nothing left but tables and confused adults. And this is why a second sleep-in was never allowed. So I was serving a family, the parents were clearly in their 50s/60s, their kids in their mid-20s. When ordering alcohol, I carded the kids but not the parents. The mom pipes up with the whole "Hey, I don't look that old, why didn't you card me?" Which always makes everything awkward, as well as being obnoxious and overdone. I respond with "Okay, let me see your ID, then." As it turns out, Mommy Dearest left her wallet at home. I informed her that, unfortunately, once requested, I am legally not allowed to serve her alcohol unless she produces a valid ID. Obviously, she's fucking furious about this, so I send the manager over to confirm with her that I am not allowed to serve her. It almost goes without saying that I didn't receive a tip, but it was worth the shitty $5 they were going to leave. This is a story my father told me at my grandfather's funeral. Many years ago, my grandparents were a young married couple with 2 small children. Money was tight, so Grandpa signed up for the Air Force to have a stable source of income. He ended up being deployed overseas. He served his time and came home. Shortly after, he and Grandma got into a blowout fight, which neither one of them was able to recall what it was actually about. Grandma, a woman with a short fuse and an explosive temper, ended up screaming something along the lines of, "I liked it better when you were deployed." Without another word, Grandpa stormed off to the nearest recruitment center and signed up for the army. So we got a new branch manager at our logistics company. The guy was notorious for being a hard ass, especially regarding sick leave. He came from a much smaller branch and was famous in the company because he had driven to the house of a worker who had rung in sick. Knocked on his door to see for himself if he was actually sick. Obviously not the way things are supposed to happen, and highly unpopular with the workers. Although he did manage to get himself promoted. Anyway, he was made boss of our branch, and first on his list was solving the sick leave problem. Notices went up that if anyone was calling in sick they had to ring him directly, not the office. Guess he didn't do the math. With approximately 200 employees, and each employee entitled to 10 sick days a year, that's 2,000 calls a year, or 40 per week or 8 per day on average, that he directed be made to him personally. With a 24 hours operation over 3 shifts, that meant the calls could come anytime. The first day there was a spike in sick leave. Guess something contagious was going around the business. He started to get calls from 3 a.m. for the morning shift, which starts at 05:00, every 15 or 20 minutes. Then calls for afternoon shift or night shift at odd time through the day and evening. The second day he came in for work looking haggard from lack of sleep. The calls must have kept coming randomly throughout the night. And each time he had to ring the office so they could organize the roster and call replacements. By the third day he looked terrible. Notices went up that morning to go back to ringing the office if calling in sick. Obviously some people didn't get the message because the calls must have continued the next night. On the 4th day he called a toolbox meeting. "Please stop ringing me," he begged. "MMC, they told us not to take any food items from the chow hall, so I took something else." So, I'm not in the military, but I did just graduate from a military youth academy run by the National Guard in California, where we live the same lifestyle as basic training for 6 months. Anyway, they gave us what they called the Blue Book, which has all of the rules and standards that we were supposed to meet, what was defined as contraband, etc. Under contraband, it was stated that no food items were to be taken from the dining facility, chow hall, at any time. And obviously, because of who I am as a person, I just had to find a way to get around this rule. Instead of taking food out of the chow hall, I started collecting the plastic spoons they gave us and hiding them in my sock to take back to our platoon's bay. Chow hall was in the same building as the barracks, where I would hide them in my locker. By the time our first pass to go home during the program rolls around, I'm bringing home a grand total of about 30 spoons. When we all came back, I told my bunkmate about what I was doing. Her general outlook on the situation was, "I don't understand you, Op, but I support you." So, she started collecting the spoons as well and giving them to me once we got back to our bay. In around a week and a half, I had already matched my previous 30. At second home pass, I had about 60 hidden in the watch cap on my way out. When the fateful day came a week after we returned, my socks had shrunk in the dryer and weren't long enough to hide the spoon, and they were tight as hell, and we didn't have pockets. But I wasn't just going to abandon my spoon. So, I carried it out of the chow hall in my hand. My platoon was reasonably confused. "Op, what are you doing? Here, give it to me, I'll hide it for you until I can throw it away." The sweet souls were trying to help me because they thought I was trying to get rid of it, like I had taken it on accident. Our cadre staff didn't notice it, and when we got back, some of the girls approached me during personal time asking why I wouldn't throw the spoon away. I explained to them the situation, and after they got over their initial shock, they had the same mindset as my bunkmate. I think they liked me. As more and more girls found out, they started collecting spoons and funneling them to me. Essentially, I was the head of a spoon trafficking ring. The night before we graduated the program, platoon sergeant sat us down and said, "So, girls, I want to hear what my platoon has gotten away with while cadre weren't looking." Everyone started laughing and looking at each other because of all the wacky shit we did, and eventually a few of the girls started telling me to tell them about the spoons. I gave in, and, since I never really did anything to get in trouble, our platoon sergeant immediately noticed me standing up to tell my story. He skipped all the rest of the girls and said, "If Op's got a story about something she did, I want to hear it." Every single girl on the bay knew what I was going to say. "Sergeant, I have spoons in my locker. Like, a lot of spoons." "Okay. I'll go get them, Sergeant." "No, I believe you." "I know, Sergeant." Fortunately, my locker is right near where I was sitting, so I go over there and start to root around in my hygiene bag where all of the spoons were stashed. It was the one place they never looked when they conducted searches. About 5 minutes and 3 confessions later, I stagger out of my out bearing the 150 of my plastic white spoons. "What the hell, Op?" said all of the cadre in unison. "This isn't even most of them, Sergeant. Truth is, I was toting about 630 at this point." Horrendous laughter echoes throughout the bay, and I sit there for the rest of confession with my spoons. At the end, our platoon sergeant says, "Listen, ladies, we already knew about all of this stuff. Every class has done it before. Well, except for the spoon thing, that one's new." At breakfast the next morning, while we were getting ready to exit the chow hall, our platoon sergeant said, "Op, you got your spoon?" Of course I had my spoon. I pulled it out of my sock and held it over my head for all to bear witness.